Hello everyone, welcome to the Aquashop WASABI Aquarium channel. In this episode, we'll be talking about how to feed your aquarium without growing algae. If you were paying attention just now, you would notice that there were the words feed and algae in the same sentence. In a planet aquarium, feeding the fish and algae growth are very closely linked together. Fish food is one of those things where you need it if you want to keep fish. So even if for some reason you don't want to feed your fish, you kind of have to, otherwise it's pretty cruel. And so when you feed your fish, the fish eat the food, the fish then defecate, and then you end up with nitrates and phosphates. Or maybe some fish food went uneaten, then that will decompose into those waste products. To put it simply, feeding your fish has a direct connection to growing algae. Because of that connection, understanding how to feed your fish is pretty important. If you don't feed the appropriate amount of food, you will keep growing algae and end up with a massive headache to deal with. Feeding properly is a vital aspect of keeping an aquarium long term, which is why I wanted to discuss this topic. Here at my shop, I get a lot of customers who are struggling with algae in their aquariums. And my job is to basically help consult, so to speak, on how to fix those algae problems. When I am helping someone diagnose their aquarium, other than asking about their water change schedule, the one question I ask no matter what is, how much do you feed your fish and how often? And I would say over half of those customers will reply with something along the lines of, I don't feed too much, or I only feed just a little bit. So then the question I ask next is, exactly how much are we talking about? For my local customers, it is easy to fix problems with feeding because I can just show you in person how little you really need to feed. When I demonstrate how much food I feed, probably 70% of my local customers will be absolutely mind blown as to how little I feed. They'll normally say something like, "What? That's all you feed?" Or, "Is that little food going to be enough for the fish?" Because of the reactions I get on how much I feed, I wanted to show you with my display aquariums exactly how much you really need in order to maintain a beautiful aquascape. When you learn to feed the correct amount of food, you will see a dramatic difference in how much algae will grow. Knowing how much is the quote-unquote correct amount of food is the most important part of this whole topic. This is because if you feed the right amount, you will not run into algae problems very much. Feeding and algae have a very strong connection to each other, and understanding it is important, so that's why I'll be talking about it. So the first question that I am usually asked is, how do you find out what the correct amount of food is? The number one way of finding out the correct amount is to look at the body shape of your fish. In general, people new to this hobby or beginners who just started will have a very difficult time knowing whether their fish is at a healthy body shape or is an obese fish. For my local customers, if they aren't sure about the shape of their fish, I'll normally ask them to show me a photo of their fish so I can find out. It's challenging, especially for beginners, to know what to even look for in a healthy or obese fish. So what I recommend instead is to look for whether the fish is skinny or not, as this is easier to see even for beginners. You may be wondering, well, what does a skinny fish look like? This may seem obvious, but a skinny fish will normally have a very flat belly, or you may see the fish's belly sort of caved in. The other way of knowing is if the belly almost looks sharp, so to speak. A skinny fish is pretty easy to spot, even for beginners, so as long as your fish don't look skinny, then the amount you are feeding is okay for now. When you try to look for an obese fish and compare it to a healthy fish, it can be tough to spot any problems, which is why I recommend instead to look for any skinny fish and compare it to a quote-unquote normal fish. Up next is finding out what the right frequency is to feed your fish. In general, feeding once a day is normally the best. There are many exceptions to not feeding once a day, but one of those is not when the fish quote-unquote look hungry and start swimming around like crazy when you get close to the aquarium. In my experience, I have heard my fair share of people feeding 2 or 3 times a day because of how much their fish looked hungry all the time. If you feed like this, you will inevitably end up feeding too much. So as a general rule of thumb, you only need to feed once a day. Later, I will talk about the actual amount to feed, but for now, just remember once a day. For frequency of feeding, one very common mistake I have seen people do is if they will be gone, let's say, 3 days on vacation, they will put in 3 days worth of food before leaving. And I completely understand why someone would think like this. For especially caring keepers, they want to make sure their fish don't starve. So the thought process goes something like, if I can't feed the tank for 3 days, then I should put in 3 days worth of food so they have enough to eat. But to tell you the truth, this is terrible for the aquarium. Reason being that you don't want to feed your fish until your fish are 100% full. This can cause stress on the internal organs on the fish, and if you continue feeding like this for a long time, they will get overweight and ultimately die from obesity. To me, this outcome is a lot more depressing than slightly underfeeding, so I recommend feeding up to about 80% full. Basically, if you think they can eat a little more, stop it there. So if you put in 3 days worth of food, the fish will gorge themselves on that food, which isn't good for them. Also, because there is 3 times the amount of food present, you will end up with uneaten food, which leads to excess waste products in the aquarium. So if you are planning on taking a vacation soon, feed only the amount you give normally. You don't need to give extra. To be honest, you don't have to give any food to your fish in this situation if you don't want to. What I mean by this is that many aquarium fish are omnivores who will graze and eat melting or dying plant matter. And over time, in a long-running aquarium, you will grow a lot of microscopic bugs and other critters that the fish can snack on. Because of all this, fish are a lot tougher when it comes to dying from starvation than many people think. For most aquarium fish, they can go a week without food and be just fine. The amount of time fish can go without food will vary based on species, but for fish like tetras and rasboras, they can go a week without food no problem. This isn't to say that these fish cannot die from starvation, they definitely can, but the chance of it happening is very low in comparison to dying from overfeeding or front-loading days worth of food before a vacation. So in general, the important thing here is don't do anything that will add excess waste to the aquarium. And I know there have been a few exceptions already, but there's another I almost forgot to mention in regards to the feeding once per day guideline. For this aquarium in particular, I have cardinal tetras and a few different species of small rasboras like Boraris brigate and Axelrodice blue rasboras. The amount of food these fish will eat and their voracity towards food is different from species to species. So when you feed your fish, you may notice that there will be species that start eating immediately and others who won't attack the food until later on. If you have fish that are slower paced in eating, I recommend splitting the amount you feed once per day in half and feed twice per day instead. That doesn't mean feed double the amount of food, but rather feed half the amount you normally give and feed twice so that the slow fish get another chance to eat. Instead of giving, let's say, 100% of the food once a day, feed 50% of the food you give twice a day so that it ends up being like you fed 100%. Sometimes, if you feed only once a day, these slower fish may not eat due to competition in the aquarium. So by feeding more often, you give the shy ones more chances to eat and reduce the chance of starvation. And you get the added side benefit of less stress on the biological filtration. The beneficial bacteria in the aquarium get less stressed if you break your feedings up, which will lead to a cleaner aquarium in the long run. So if you do have more shy fish in the aquarium, keep an eye on them before you leave for vacation so that they don't starve while you are gone. Next, let me introduce you to the food that I use here at the shop. Here I use the ADA AP line of fish food, and this is a granular type pellet food. Depending on the size of the pellets, you'll see the ADA fish food labeled as AP1, 2, or 3. For your commonly kept species like cardinal tetras, neon tetras, and adult fish of similar species, the AP2 size is the one I recommend. For really small cherisons or rasboras, there is a chance that the AP2 size is too large for their mouth, so if that's the case, I would recommend getting the smaller AP1 instead. When it comes to choosing a fish food to use, instead of looking at the brand or product label, look at the quantity of food that the product has. The reason why is that all of these fish foods on the market have had many years worth of research and money poured into the formulations, so regardless of what brand of food you have at home, it should be just fine to feed. Next, let's talk about some things you should be careful of. Now, many fish foods on the market come in these sorts of plastic containers where you just pop the lid open and boom, there's the food. I would say the majority of aquarium keepers will use their fingers to grab some food and then feed the fish. Using your fingers to grab fish food is bad, and here's why. The surface of human hands normally have contaminants like oils and moisture on their skin. If you stick that hand into the food, those oils and moisture from your hand will get onto the food and it will cause the food to start oxidizing. Now, if you know you'll use up all that food in a week or two, then you won't run into any problems. But if you have a larger container of food, like this one, or you know you'll use that food for many months, then keeping contaminants out will become pretty important. If you feed your fish contaminated, oxidized food long term, then you will run into issues later down the line. When you work around any aquarium, it's inevitable that you'll get wet hands, and if you get excess moisture into the food, it can start to go bad, which we don't want happening. So when you feed your fish, I recommend using some sort of tool like a small spoon to grab your food so that you can avoid any contamination issues. Here at the shop, I use one of these ADA AP glass fish feeders, and it works by pressing this spring up here to put the food in, thus avoiding any direct contact with the food. Also, it has an airtight seal on the cap here, so you can avoid any excess moisture getting in contact with the food. With tools like these, it becomes very easy to do fine adjustments to how much you feed. But even if you don't have something like this, it's okay. Just use a spoon or a small scoop of some sort and you'll be good to go. Now, it's time to feed some fish. The key point here is to look at how much food I am putting in. But first, some background information on this setup. This here is a 30 centimeter cube aquarium with around 17 or 18 Ariceus woworae, also called the Daisy's rice fish. These rice fish are currently around 2.5 centimeters long. Knowing this information on how many fish there are and of their current size, take a close look at how much food I am giving. And for the purpose of this video, I will be timing these fish to see how long it takes for them to finish eating. You should also time your fish to see how long it takes for them to finish eating, because that is also important to know. Now, let's feed some fish. And that looks about right. This may look like a very small amount of food, but I think I may have even overfed on accident this time. And as you can see, the fish are eating the pellets from this camera angle above the aquarium. It can be hard to tell due to the angle, but the fish are generally eating the pellets from the surface of the water before it has a chance to sink. This is a key point because if you're feeding and a lot of food starts sinking to the bottom, then there is a chance that you are overfeeding. So the trick here is to feed what they can finish at the surface of the water before the food starts sinking. If you do overfeed, it is very common to see a lot of the food sinking and piling up at the bottom of the aquarium. If you do see this happening, you are feeding too much. And right about now, the fish are finishing the remaining few pellets. The fish are a little intimidated for some reason right now, so they aren't eating as fast as they normally do. Right now, it's been about 2 minutes since starting the timer. On an average day, this number and size fish should finish eating in about 1 minute 30 seconds. Next, let me show you how much I feed this 60 centimeter aquarium here. This time from a lower angle so that you can see the surface of the water. This way, you might have an easier time seeing how much to feed compared to the previous shot from above. And like last time, I will start a timer to see how long it takes for these guys to finish eating. For this aquarium, the main fish in here are cardinal tetras, with a few other species of smaller fish like some Boraras brigatae, Axolotls blue rasboras, endless guppies, and some Gertrudae rainbow fish. It's kind of a mishmash of different species with varying max size on each of them. The main fish are the cardinal tetras, but there are around 40 fish total, with many of them being nanofish, so keep that in mind for how much I'm feeding. For this aquarium, because there are a few nanofish, I'll feed some of the pellets normally, but I'll also take some pellets, crush them in my fingers, and feed those smaller bits of food to feed the nanofish. Now I'll start the timer and then feed the fish. And that's it for the pellets normally. They are acting scared right now, but they're starting to eat now, so that's good. As I mentioned earlier, for this aquarium, I'll take some pellets and crush them with my fingers to feed the smaller fish. If you can only get one kind of food, I recommend you get something slightly bigger than what your smallest fish can eat. That way you can just crush some up for those specific species. In an ideal world, you have 2 or even 3 different size foods so that you can feed the right size food to everyone. But if you can't, that's okay. Just get something slightly larger and crush it up. But yeah, these fish are also eating slowly today. But if you've been watching the surface of the aquarium, then you get the general idea of how much you should be feeding. Like last time, I have had the timer running, and it is taking much longer for the fish to finish eating than they normally do. On an average day, these 40 fish will finish eating after around 2 minutes, so I hope you use this information as a reference. Oh, and there's one more thing I forgot to mention, and that is when you should not feed your fish. Let me give you an example to make it more clear. For example, on the day you add any new fish to your aquarium, do not feed the fish. So basically, don't feed the fish after buying it, taking it home, acclimating it to your aquarium, then introducing it. When you do add new fish, you should not feed them for the first 24 hours. The reason why is when you put fish into a new environment, it takes a lot of their energy to adapt to new water parameters. And if you feed this new fish that is stressed out, the food will then further stress out the digestive system in particular. If this happens, the new fish can get sick a lot easier, which we don't want to happen. So that's why I recommend you not feed any new fish for 24 hours. If you want to go more than 1 day of fasting, let's say 2 or even 3 days, then that's perfectly fine. The key point is to not add any more things that could stress the new fish out. I personally don't feed new fish for 24 hours, but I will go longer based on what species of fish it is, how sensitive it is, and etc. The next moment you want to avoid feeding is the day you are planning to do a water change. You do not want to feed your fish after doing a water change, and the reason is the same as why we don't want to feed new fish. When you do a water change, you will lose a slight amount of bacteria and also cause a pH swing. During this change, the fish have to use more energy than normal in order to adjust to the new water parameters. So if you feed them when they are under some stress from that water change, the food just adds on even more stress. If you want to feed them the next day, then feel free to. Just don't feed the same day you do a water change. Geez, this time around it really took some time for them. Almost too much time to finish eating. But yeah, for this number of smaller fishes, you want to aim for them to finish eating after around 2 minutes. I'm going to repeat myself again, but it really is best to give them slightly less food rather than too much. If you are thinking to yourself, isn't this not enough? Then that is probably the correct amount. The main thing is to avoid overfeeding at all costs. As long as you avoid that, you will not have as bad of an algae issue and your fish will live longer and healthier. The saying goes, a little goes a long way, right? So, how's the video? This time, I talked about an important part of solving the number one headache in keeping an aquarium, and that is algae growth. Specifically, we discussed the correlation between feeding your fish and algae, as overfeeding your fish is a very common reason why you may run into algae problems. If you take some parts of the video as a reference point, such as the amount I recommend feeding, then you should see some of your algae problem go away. You know, I would say the top 3 reasons why algae can get out of hand is because of 1. A dirty aquarium, 2. Feeding your fish improperly, which is what we talked about, and 3. Plants not growing. If you can get these 3 common problems solved, then I would say 95% of people's algae problems will go away. In the past, I have made videos about algae, such as how to fix an algae problem and how to make an aquarium that won't grow algae. So if you are interested in learning more, I've put links in the description below to those videos, so please check them out. When things go horribly wrong in a planet aquarium, such as a complete algae takeover, there is definitely something hiding in plain sight that you have to fix in order to cure your problem. Finding that something is key in solving large problems like a massive algae outbreak. In previous videos, I have gone over different scenarios of why algae will grow. So if you have an algae problem, and you try one of these fixes and it doesn't work, then you have at least narrowed down the possibilities. If you keep trying these different fixes, and you do start to see the amount of algae go down, then you know you're on the right track. With algae in particular, the whole topic is a complex jumble of possibilities, with there being so many different scenarios or reasons why it will grow. It is not a topic where I can just tell you to do one thing and then the issue is resolved. Like I mentioned earlier, you have to go through these different processes in order to truly know what is causing those algae problems. When you do run into an algae problem, don't give up. Just keep trying those different solutions to the whole algae issue, and you will eventually have your answer. You will be able to achieve that beautiful, show-quality planet aquarium, so just try your best. So if you have any more questions regarding this topic on how to properly feed your fish, please leave a comment down below. Unfortunately, I am unable to answer everyone's comments at the moment, so I hope you can understand that. But if there's the same or similar questions asked multiple times, then I will answer it as a new video instead, so please, if you do have questions, don't be afraid to ask. If this video has helped you out in any way, or you enjoy this type of content, please like the video and subscribe to the WASABI Aquarium channel. That's the end of the